The tool I'm about to show you is well supported by the evidence, and in fact, it's one of the best bang for your buck exercises you can do with your clients to help them make long-term gains and improve their performance on tasks over time. I begin my sessions with part of the plan do review. How was your last week or 2 weeks? What went well? What was challenging? What could you do the same next time? And what would you do differently? Generally, clients are only going to share with me information that they actually care about. They're not going to report on issues that don't really bother them or don't really have an impact. They likely just wouldn't even tell me about those. But taking the time to reflect on what tasks went well helps them build insight into, okay, those ones are relatively easy for me, and it helps me understand, I wonder why that is. What are your strengths that made that task easier for you compared to what are your relative challenges that you, my client, cares about? Then we get curious about the why was that task challenging? With the information about why a task was challenging, we can then come up with a plan to implement strategies to improve your performance next time. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's jump into the tool. We're going to work through a functional example of how to use the plan, do, review, and metacognition. In this case, my client wanted to plan a trip overseas. Let's go through the planning phase. What does she already know about planning trips? Well, she knows she has to pack electronics and documents. The timing of when she takes her trip is important, and there's lots of planning to do, including what are you going to pack? How are you going to get there? How long will you be there? Who will you see? Can you afford it? Plan the currency exchange and let your credit card company know. You tap into your long-term memory by thinking, when have I planned a trip before? So you're not reinventing the wheel. You are using an example that you've already had and building from there. So in this example, I changed the details, but for example, in 2019, my client may have planned a trip to Africa. Using that long-term memory, you can reflect on what challenges has this client had before with planning trips. For this particular client, she's had challenges with packing lightly. So to solve that problem this time, she's planning on keeping it just to 7 outfits. The next question taps into metacognitive skills, or thinking about how you think. How will thinking of these questions in the plan do review help my client with returning to planning a trip? In my client's case, she said it will make her brain feel, in my client's case, she said it will make her brain feel more organized. She won't feel so scatterbrained, and she'll have a guide that she can follow. So it will be less cognitively demanding. This tool will also help her feel confident that she hasn't missed or forgotten any important details. When I asked her what she thought would go well, she believed that having this plan do review guide would help make the traveling process easier. When I asked her what does she anticipate will be challenging, she thought keeping things organized will be difficult, managing her 2 young children, and dealing with all of these variables and tasks. Not every prompting question on here is going to be applicable to every circumstance, so you can pick and choose. So in this case, what materials or things do I need to start planning this trip? We have this tool that we're using already, and that was kind of sufficient for us. What facts does she need to consider before getting started planning this trip? For example, what are the safety concerns? So my client wanted to do research on how concussion symptoms can be impacted by flying. She wanted to remember to pack medications that they would need over the course of the trip, including during traveling. She wanted to potentially explore using Apple AirTags on a necklace with her kids to improve their safety and add that little bit of reassurance that they won't get lost, or if they do, they'll be faster to find. And my client identified she needs to arrange a ride or transportation to get to the airport. We then brainstormed what help might she need with this process. So she could look into getting a driver through the Robert Q or another driving service to take her to London. She could look into catching a train. When prompted to consider how much time she will need, she set the goal of wanting to have all the details organized within the next 2 weeks. And the next prompt, what steps do I take to accomplish my goal? We decided to use the project chunking guide to flesh that out further. Feel free to check out my other video on the project chunking guide to see how we used it with this example. The next step of the plan do review is do. Finally, and actually the most important part of the task is to review. Even though this is the most important part of the task, most of my clients don't do it unless I force them to. But this is where you reflect on what took you longer than expected, what took you less time than expected, what errors did you make versus what parts went well, what parts were difficult to accomplish, what would you do differently next time, but equally important, what would you do the same? There's also a spot for any other thoughts that have come up during this process. Perhaps you gained insight into some of your cognitive communication challenges, or perhaps you have questions about why did that tire me out more than I thought it would? This is a good place to do a thought dump to share with your therapist so that we can unpack it further during sessions. So that is the plan, do, review. And this is a really nice flexible tool that applies to pretty much any situation. It is all communication based. You are taking the brain fog of this complex, huge task. So people who have challenges with executive functions like planning, organizing, sequencing, problem solving, decision making, reasoning, and challenges with working memory and attention, etc. This tool helps with all of that, where the clinician can cue the client through an organized thought process, get it written down so that it's no longer in a swirly muck in a fog in your head. You've now made it concrete on paper in an organized way, so now you can work effectively with the information. I invite you right now to reflect on your last week. What parts went well? What parts were difficult? Why were they difficult? How would you approach this task next time to improve your performance? What would stay the same versus what would you change? Good luck, and let's get better together.